What I'm about to tell you defies everything we think we know about seamanship, preparation, and the predictable nature of coastal sailing. It's a story that haunts every sailing instructor from Maine to Florida, whispered in yacht clubs and maritime academies as a cautionary tale that shouldn't exist. Because when you hear what really happened to Jake Morrison, when you see the evidence that was finally uncovered 3 years after his disappearance, you'll question everything you thought you knew about the ocean's capacity for the impossible. In this story, we're going to dissect every detail of Jake's final voyage, examine the Coast Guard reports that were initially classified, and reveal the chilling discovery that rewrote maritime safety protocols across 3 states. We'll walk through his final radio transmission word by word, analyze the weather data that painted a perfect sailing day, and uncover the single oversight that turned a routine 200-mile coastal hop into one of the most baffling disappearances in modern sailing history. This isn't just another sailing accident, it's a reminder that the ocean doesn't care how prepared you think you are, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the storm you can see coming, but the one element you never thought to check. Jake Morrison was everything you'd want in a sailor. At 21, this University of Maine marine biology major had already logged over 2,000 nautical miles, most of them single-handed aboard his meticulously maintained Catalina 30 Sea Scholar. With sun-bleached hair and calloused hands that spoke of countless hours handling lines and adjusting sails, Jake embodied the new generation of sailors who combined old-school seamanship with modern technology and safety protocols. His professors described him as methodical to a fault. While his classmates were cramming for finals in the library, Jake could be found in the marine lab, studying tidal charts with the same intensity others reserved for organic chemistry. His dorm room walls were covered not with typical college posters, but with weather routing charts, updated every morning with meticulous pencil marks tracking pressure systems across the North Atlantic. The dream that consumed Jake wasn't exotic. He simply wanted to sail home to his family's cottage in Cape Cod for summer break. But for Jake, this wasn't just transportation. It was a pilgrimage. Every spring semester, he would spend weeks planning the route from Bar Harbor to Wellfleet, calculating optimal departure windows, studying current charts, and preparing his boat with the thoroughness of someone planning a transatlantic crossing. His girlfriend, Sarah Chen, often teased him about his obsessive preparation for what was essentially a coastal cruise that thousands of recreational sailors completed every summer weekend. "Jake, it's 200 miles, she would laugh, watching him organize and reorganize his emergency supplies for the 3rd time. People do this trip in sunfish. But Jake's response was always the same. The ocean doesn't care if it's 2 miles or 2,000. Preparation isn't about the distance, it's about respect. This respect had been earned through experience. At 16, Jake had been caught in a sudden squall off Mount Desert Island during a family sailing trip. While his father panicked and his mother clutched the radio, Jake had calmly reefed the mainsail, secured loose gear, and guided their charter boat to safety in Northeast Harbor. That day had crystallized his life's philosophy. The sea rewards preparation and punishes assumptions. The Morrison family had been sailing for 3 generations. Jake's grandfather, Captain Robert Morrison, had served in the Merchant Marine during World War II, crossing the Atlantic dozens of times in convoy ships while dodging German U-boats. His stories of massive storms and 20-foot seas had instilled in young Jake a healthy respect for the ocean's power. But they had also taught him that proper preparation and seamanship could overcome almost any challenge the sea could present. Jake's father, Michael Morrison, had continued the family tradition as a weekend sailor, taking the family on summer cruises throughout New England waters. It was on these trips that Jake had learned the fundamentals of navigation, weather reading, and boat handling. By age 12, he could plot a course, read tide tables, and handle a sailboat in moderate conditions. By 16, he was regularly single-handing the family's Cape Dory 28 on overnight trips. But Jake's passion went beyond recreational sailing. His marine biology studies had given him an intimate understanding of ocean dynamics, current patterns, and the complex interactions between weather, water, and marine life. His professors often remarked that Jake approached sailing not just as sport or transportation, but as applied oceanography. By his senior year, Jake had transformed Sea Scholar from a decent cruising boat into a showcase of safety and efficiency. The Catalina 30, originally built in 1995, had been purchased by Jake's parents as a graduation gift from high school. But Jake had spent 4 years systematically upgrading every system aboard. He had installed redundant navigation systems, 2 GPS units, both regularly updated with the latest charts, paper charts that he replaced annually, and a compass that he calibrated monthly using known bearings from prominent landmarks. His safety equipment exceeded Coast Guard requirements by nearly 300%. 2 6-person life rafts instead of the required one, an EPIRB beacon that he tested monthly, flares that he replaced annually regardless of expiration dates, and a marine radio equipped with both VHF and single sideband capabilities. The boat's engine, a reliable Westerbeck diesel, received professional service every 6 months. Jake maintained detailed logs of engine hours, oil changes, fuel consumption, and performance metrics. The rigging was inspected annually by a certified rigger, with standing rigging replaced every 8 years and running rigging replaced every 3 years regardless of apparent condition. His preparation for the May 2019 voyage home was typical Jake Morrison. He spent 2 weeks studying weather patterns, consulting with 3 different meteorologists, and even calling the Coast Guard stations along his route to confirm their communication schedules. He filed a detailed float plan with both the University Harbormaster and the Coast Guard, including not just his planned route and timing, but alternative routes for various weather scenarios. The float plan was a masterpiece of contingency planning. It included primary and alternate routes, storm harbors every 20 miles along the coast, communication schedules with specific times and frequencies, detailed descriptions of Sea Scholar's safety equipment, and even dietary restrictions in case rescue became necessary. Jake had learned that the more information rescue authorities had, the faster and more effective any response could be. The boat inspection he conducted 3 days before departure was exhaustive. Jake tested every piece of safety equipment, verified the operation of all electronics, and even had the engine surveyed by a marine mechanic despite having done the same inspection 6 months earlier. He pressure tested the life raft inflation system, verified the battery charge on his EPIRB, and tested his radio equipment on multiple frequencies. His provisioning list read like a manual for Arctic exploration. Enough food for 2 weeks, despite planning a 3-day voyage. Water for 10 days, stored in multiple containers throughout the boat. Medical supplies that would stock a small clinic, and tools for virtually any repair scenario imaginable. His spare parts inventory included extra engine belts, hoses, electrical components, sail repair materials, and even backup instruments. Jake's meticulous nature extended to weather planning. He subscribed to 3 professional weather routing services, consulted daily with meteorologists at the National Weather Service, and maintained contact with other sailors who regularly traveled his intended route. His weather files for the May 15th departure contained printed forecasts, satellite imagery, pressure charts, and wind predictions from multiple sources, all cross-referenced and analyzed for consistency. His departure from Bar Harbor on May 15, 2019, was witnessed by dozens of fellow students and faculty members. Professor Margaret Wells, who had supervised his marine biology thesis, later told investigators that Jake's pre-departure routine was like watching a space launch. He tested his radio 3 times, verified GPS coordinates against his paper charts, checked weather updates on 4 different sources, and even called the Coast Guard to confirm his float plan details one final time. The send-off had an almost ceremonial quality. Jake's sailing club friends gathered at the dock to wish him well, many of them envious of his opportunity to sail home rather than face the long drive down Interstate 95. Sarah Chen was there, despite her concerns about Jake's solo sailing. She had wanted to accompany him, but her summer internship at the Bar Harbor Marine Lab required her presence. "I'll call you from every scheduled radio check," Jake promised her as he prepared to cast off the dock lines. "And I'll be anchored in Wellfleet Harbor by Thursday afternoon, guaranteed." His confidence was infectious. Everyone who knew Jake understood that if anyone could execute a flawless coastal passage, it was him. The weather forecast was pristine, a sailor's dream that comes perhaps a dozen times each season along the Maine coast. High pressure dominated the region, promising light southwesterly winds of 8 to 12 knots, calm seas with swells under 2 feet, and unlimited visibility. The marine forecast called it ideal sailing conditions and predicted the pattern would hold for at least 72 hours. Even the long-range forecast showed no significant weather systems approaching the coast for the next week. Jake's planned route was conservative and well-traveled. He would sail southwest along the Maine coast, staying roughly 5 miles offshore, close enough to reach shelter quickly if weather changed, but far enough out to avoid the lobster pot fields that could snag an unwary sailor. His intermediate waypoints included Monhegan Island, Pemaquid Point and Cape Elizabeth, before turning west toward Cape Cod Bay. The route had been chosen after extensive consultation with local sailors and Coast Guard personnel. It represented the optimal balance between safety and efficiency, keeping him in well-traveled waters where other vessels could provide assistance if needed, while avoiding the coastal traffic and fishing activity that could create hazards. At 9:47 a.m., Jake made his first scheduled radio call to the Coast Guard. His voice was calm and professional as he reported his position 10 miles southeast of Bar Harbor, with all systems operating normally and making good progress in light winds. The duty officer noted that Morrison sounded relaxed and in control, exactly what you'd expect from an experienced sailor on a perfect sailing day. The radio transmission was crystal clear, with no static or interference. Jake reported wind speed at 10 knots from the southwest, seas calm with 1-foot swells, and visibility unlimited. His GPS position matched perfectly with his planned track, and he was maintaining a steady 5.5 knots under full sail. Engine hours logged showed minimal usage, just the few minutes required to clear the harbor and position for sail setting. The second scheduled call came at 2:15 p.m., with Jake reporting his position as 15 miles south of Pemaquid Point, right on his planned track and slightly ahead of schedule. He mentioned that winds had increased to a pleasant 12-15 knots, and he was making excellent time. Background sounds on the radio transmission included the typical sounds of a boat moving well through calm water, wind in the rigging, occasional splash of spray, and the steady hum of his instruments. During this transmission, Jake also reported sighting several other sailboats, indicating healthy weekend traffic along the coast. He mentioned passing a lobster boat whose captain had waved. Normal interactions that painted a picture of a busy, safe stretch of water where help would be available if needed. His third, and what would become his final scheduled radio call, came at 6:22 p.m. Jake reported his position as 8 miles southeast of Portland Head Light, still maintaining perfect adherence to his planned route. He confirmed that all systems remained operational and estimated arrival at Cape Cod Bay the following afternoon, well within his planned schedule. The transmission quality was excellent, with no indication of equipment problems or distress. This final call lasted nearly 3 minutes, longer than his previous check-ins. Jake reported that he was preparing for nighttime sailing, had activated his navigation lights, and was adjusting his watch schedule for single-handed night operations. He mentioned that dinner was heating on his alcohol stove, and that he planned to maintain his current heading through the night, with his next scheduled call at 6 a.m. the following morning. The duty officer, who took Jake's final transmission, later testified that everything about the call was routine and professional. Jake's voice showed no stress. His position reports were precise, and his weather observations matched official forecasts perfectly. There was absolutely nothing to suggest that within 4 hours, Jake Morrison and Sea Scholar would simply cease to exist. What happened next would confound investigators, challenge fundamental assumptions about coastal sailing safety, and ultimately lead to a complete revision of maritime emergency protocols. Because at 10:30 p.m. that same evening, exactly 4 hours and 8 minutes after his final scheduled radio transmission, a lobster boat captain named Robert Henley spotted something that shouldn't exist. Henley was returning to port after checking traps near Richmond Island when his spotlight caught what appeared to be debris floating in calm water. As he moved closer, his blood turned cold. Scattered across nearly a quarter-mile of ocean were pieces of Sea Scholar, sailcloth, cushions, plastic containers, and dozens of smaller items that could only come from a boat's interior. The debris field was unlike anything Henley had seen in 30 years of lobster fishing. Personal items were scattered, as if someone had opened every locker and compartment aboard Sea Scholar and thrown the contents into the water. He spotted Jake's foul weather jacket, still bright yellow and easily identifiable, floating alongside books, cooking utensils, and electronic equipment. But there was no sign of the boat itself, no sign of Jake Morrison, and most disturbing of all, no indication whatsoever of what could have caused a well-maintained sailboat to suddenly disintegrate in perfect weather. The water was still calm, the wind light, and visibility perfect. Yet somehow, A 30-foot sailboat had been completely destroyed, leaving only scattered contents floating in the darkness. Henley immediately radioed the Coast Guard, his voice shaking as he tried to describe what he was seeing. "Coast Guard, this is fishing vessel Mary Catherine. I've got a major debris field here. Looks like a recreational sailboat has been destroyed. I can see personal effects, cushions, sailcloth, but no hull, no mast, no people. Something's very wrong out here." The Coast Guard response was immediate and massive. Within 30 minutes, helicopters were airborne, patrol boats were racing to the scene, and the largest maritime search and rescue operation in Maine waters in over a decade was underway. The search area, initially centered on Henley's debris discovery, would eventually encompass over 400 square nautical miles. Coast Guard Cutter Seneca arrived on scene at 11:45 p.m., followed by helicopter units from Air Station Cape Cod. The initial assessment was grim. The debris field contained hundreds of items from Sea Scholar's interior, but no sign of the vessel's structure or its captain. Searchlights swept the dark water methodically, looking for any indication of survivors or additional wreckage. What the searchers found only deepened the mystery. The debris field contained items from throughout Sea Scholar's interior, galley equipment, clothing, books, even Jake's carefully maintained logbook. But analysis of the debris pattern revealed something that violated basic physics. The items were distributed as if they had been scattered from a great height, not dispersed by a boat breaking apart on the surface. More puzzling still, several items showed signs of extreme pressure damage, compression fractures, and crushing that typically indicated exposure to depths of hundreds of feet. Jake's marine radio, recovered intact but crushed, showed damage consistent with having been subjected to pressures equivalent to depths of over 300 feet. Yet the water depth in the debris area was only 43 feet, and the perfectly calm conditions made it impossible for debris to have been driven to such depths by wave action. The most disturbing discovery came when Coast Guard divers examined the seafloor beneath the debris field. They found nothing. No wreckage, no hull fragments, no anchor or keel, nothing to indicate that a 30-foot sailboat had ever been in the area. It was as if Sea Scholar had simply vanished, leaving behind only scattered contents that defied explanation. The seafloor in the area was sandy bottom with scattered rocks, exactly what the charts indicated. There were no obstructions, no unusual features, and no evidence of any recent disturbance. The divers completed a grid search covering over 200 square yards, but found no trace of Sea Scholar's hull, rigging, or major components. As search operations continued into their second day, investigators began examining Jake's radio transmissions with increasing confusion. Analysis of the signal strength and propagation patterns from his final call indicated that he had indeed been where he reported, 8 miles southeast of Portland Head Light. But the debris field was located nearly 15 miles northeast of that position, in waters that Jake would have had no reason to enter. The timeline made even less sense. Based on the distribution pattern and tidal flow analysis, investigators calculated that the debris had been in the water for no more than 2 hours when Henley discovered it. Yet Jake's final radio call had been made more than 4 hours earlier from a position miles away. The mathematics of wind, current, and drift rates simply didn't support the possibility that debris from Jake's position could have reached Henley's discovery location in the available time. Senior Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, who coordinated the search operation, later described the case as impossible from every angle we examined it. The debris pattern, the timeline, the lack of wreckage, and the pressure damage on recovered items created a puzzle that seemed to have no solution within the known laws of physics and maritime dynamics. 3 days into the search, with no sign of Jake or his boat, investigators received a report that would shatter their understanding of the case entirely. A private weather monitoring station on Peaks Island had recorded an anomalous pressure spike at approximately 9:15 p.m. on May 15th, just over an hour before the estimated time of Sea Scholar's destruction. The spike was brief but extreme, equivalent to the pressure wave that might result from an underwater explosion. The pressure reading showed a sudden spike to nearly twice normal atmospheric pressure, lasting for approximately 15 seconds before returning to baseline. The monitoring station's equipment was regularly calibrated and had never recorded similar anomalous readings. The timing coincided almost perfectly with the window when investigators believed Sea Scholar had been destroyed. Yet there was no known source for such an explosion. Naval officials confirmed that no military exercises were scheduled in the area, no commercial blasting operations were permitted, and no other vessels had reported any unusual occurrences. The pressure spike remained unexplained, a 15-second anomaly in otherwise perfect weather data. The investigation expanded to include explosives experts, naval personnel, and even terrorism specialists. Every possible explanation was examined. Rogue submarines, underwater mines left from World War II, gas explosions from the boat's propane system, even the possibility of a meteorite impact. None of these theories could account for the complete disappearance of Sea Scholar's hull while leaving debris scattered over such a wide area. As weeks passed without answers, the case began to attract national attention. Maritime magazines featured articles about Jake's disappearance, sailing forums buzzed with theories, and the Coast Guard found itself defending its search procedures against criticism from armchair investigators who believed the official response had been inadequate. The breakthrough that would ultimately solve the mystery came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a marine geologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, had been following news reports of Jake's disappearance when something in the debris pattern triggered her memory. The distribution of materials, the pressure damage, and most importantly, the location of the debris field matched patterns she had observed in her research on underwater landslides. Vasquez contacted the Coast Guard investigators with a theory that seemed impossible. Sea Scholar might have been destroyed by a submarine avalanche, an underwater landslide that could generate tremendous pressures and literally crush a vessel from below. But according to all available charts, the seafloor in the area was stable, with no indication of slopes steep enough to support such an event. Her theory was initially dismissed as academic speculation. The charts showed uniform depth in the area, with no significant underwater topography. The seafloor was described as gently sloping sand and gravel bottom, with no indication of instability. Every maritime resource available to recreational sailors indicated that the area was safe, stable, and suitable for navigation. But Dr. Vasquez was persistent. She explained that underwater landslides could occur in areas that appeared stable on surface charts, particularly in regions where glacial deposits had created unstable sediment layers. The pressure waves generated by such events could crush vessels, create debris fields similar to what had been found, and leave no trace of the underlying cause. This assumption proved fatally wrong. When investigators finally commissioned a detailed sonar survey of the area where Jake's debris was found, they discovered that the seafloor charts used by recreational sailors, including the ones Jake had relied on for his meticulous planning, were catastrophically inaccurate. The survey revealed an underwater canyon that plunged over 200 feet deep, its walls composed of unstable glacial sediments deposited during the last ice age. The canyon appeared on no recreational chart and wasn't marked on any of the GPS systems commonly used by small craft operators. It existed in what navigators call a chart blank, an area where detailed bottom surveys had never been conducted because it was assumed to be uniformly shallow. The canyon was approximately 300 yards long and 150 yards wide, oriented northeast to southwest. Its walls were nearly vertical in some places, composed of layers of clay, sand, and gravel that had been deposited by retreating glaciers over 10,000 years ago. These sediments, while stable under normal conditions, were susceptible to sudden failure when saturated with water and subjected to certain triggering events. More critically, the survey showed clear evidence of a recent massive landslide. Thousands of tons of sediment had cascaded down the canyon walls, creating a debris field on the ocean floor that perfectly matched the time frame of Jake's disappearance. The pressure wave generated by this underwater avalanche would have been sufficient to crush a small vessel, explaining both the rapid destruction of Sea Scholar and the pressure damage found on debris items. The landslide scar on the canyon's eastern wall showed that approximately 15,000 cubic yards of sediment had suddenly given way, tumbling into the canyon's depths and creating a pressure wave that propagated upward through the water column. The force would have been equivalent to a substantial underwater explosion, creating pressures that could crush a sailboat's hull in seconds. The landslide had been triggered by a phenomenon that occurs roughly once every 50 years along this section of coast. The gradual saturation of glacial sediments by decades of tidal action finally reaches a critical threshold, causing sudden slope failure. The process is entirely natural, completely unpredictable, and utterly catastrophic for any vessel that happens to be positioned above the slide zone when it occurs. Geological analysis of sediment samples from the slide area revealed that the failure had been building for decades. Tidal pumping had gradually saturated the glacial deposits, while wave action and temperature changes had slowly weakened the bonds holding the sediment layers together. On the evening of May 15, 2019, these forces finally overcame the slope's stability, triggering the catastrophic failure that destroyed Sea Scholar. Reconstruction of Jake's final hour revealed the horrible irony of his disappearance. His navigation had been flawless, his seamanship impeccable, and his preparation beyond reproach. But the one thing he couldn't prepare for, the one element missing from every safety manual, every seamanship course, and every piece of navigation equipment he carried, was the knowledge that the seafloor beneath him was fundamentally unstable. Analysis of his final radio transmission revealed that Jake had been sailing directly over the future landslide zone when he made the call. The calm confidence in his voice indicated no awareness of any danger, because there was no visible danger to perceive. The ocean surface was placid, the weather perfect, and his boat was performing flawlessly. GPS analysis of his reported position showed that Sea Scholar had been positioned almost exactly in the center of what would become the landslide impact zone. His speed and heading indicated that he was sailing directly across the unstable area, likely attracted by the slightly deeper water that the hidden canyon provided. Deeper water that offered better wind and less risk of encountering lobster trap gear. Based on the timing of the pressure spike recorded by the Peaks Island Weather Station, investigators calculated that the landslide occurred at approximately 9:15 p.m., roughly 2 hours and 50 minutes after Jake's final transmission. He had likely finished his dinner, completed his evening navigation check, and was preparing for the night watches that would carry him safely to Cape Cod. The submarine avalanche would have lasted less than 30 seconds. The initial tremor might have felt like turbulence from a passing ship's wake, but within moments, the water column above the slide zone would have become a churning maelstrom of pressure waves, debris, and displaced water. Sea Scholar, caught directly in the chaos, would have been crushed and dragged down before Jake could even reach his radio to send a distress call. The pressure wave would have hit Sea Scholar from below, crushing the hull and driving the boat downward with tremendous force. The mast would have snapped, the cabin would have imploded, and Jake would have been overwhelmed by the sudden violence of forces beyond human comprehension. Within seconds, Sea Scholar would have been reduced to fragments, most of which would have been driven deep into the canyon by the avalanche debris. Only the boat's lighter contents, cushions, clothing, books, and other items that could float, would have eventually escaped the canyon and risen to the surface. Even these items bore the crushing damage from the extreme pressures they had briefly experienced, before breaking free and floating upward to create the debris field that Robert Henley discovered. The official Coast Guard report, released 18 months after Jake's disappearance, fundamentally changed maritime safety protocols along the entire eastern seaboard. It mandated updated bathymetric surveys of all areas marked for recreational navigation, required inclusion of geological hazard warnings on marine charts, and established new emergency communication requirements for vessels transiting areas with unstable seafloors. The report's recommendations led to the most comprehensive chart revision project in Coast Guard history. Over 2,000 miles of coastline were resurveyed using modern sonar technology, revealing dozens of previously unknown underwater hazards. The project identified 47 additional areas where glacial deposits created potential landslide risks, all of which were subsequently marked on recreational navigation charts. New regulations required that marine chart publishers include geological hazard warnings for areas where underwater landslides were possible. GPS systems were updated to provide warnings when vessels entered areas of known seafloor instability. Emergency communication protocols were revised to require more frequent check-ins for vessels transiting potentially hazardous areas. But for Sarah Chen, for Jake's parents, and for the sailing community that had watched him grow from an enthusiastic teenager into an exemplary mariner, no protocol changes could diminish the cruel randomness of his fate. Jake Morrison had done everything right. His preparation was meticulous, his equipment redundant and tested, his skills honed by thousands of hours on the water. He had been defeated not by carelessness or bad judgment, but by a geological process that began during the last ice age and culminated in 30 seconds of underwater violence on a perfect sailing evening in May. The memorial service held at the University of Maine drew over 300 people, including Coast Guard officers who had never met Jake but felt compelled to honor a sailor whose disappearance had taught them something profound about the ocean's capacity for surprise. Professor Wells read from Jake's thesis on coastal marine ecosystems, which contained a passage that would later be engraved on the memorial plaque installed at the Bar Harbor Marina. The sea demands not just our respect, but our humility. We prepare not because preparation guarantees safety, but because preparation honors the magnitude of what we're attempting to understand. Sarah Chen spoke at the memorial, her voice steady despite her grief. Jake taught me that the ocean isn't our enemy, she said. It's simply operating according to rules we don't always understand. He would want his story to help other sailors, not to frighten them away from the water he loved so much. Jake's parents established a scholarship fund for marine science students, focusing on coastal geology and underwater hazard research. The fund has supported dozens of graduate students whose research continues to improve understanding of submarine landslide risks and other hidden oceanic dangers. Jake's story spread throughout the sailing community with the speed that only true cautionary tales achieve. Sailing magazines featured articles about submarine landslides. Marine geology courses became required curriculum at sailing schools, and charter companies began including seafloor instability briefings in their orientation sessions. Professional sailors, those who make their living on the water, were perhaps most affected by Jake's story. Here was a sailor who had done everything they would have done, prepared as they would have prepared, and sailed as they would have sailed. His disappearance served as a reminder that experience and preparation, while essential, cannot protect against every possible danger the ocean might present. The technical sailing community embraced Jake's legacy by developing new safety protocols specifically designed to address geological hazards. Sailing schools began teaching courses on underwater topography and landslide recognition. Chart plotting courses now include sections on interpreting geological hazard warnings and planning routes that minimize exposure to unstable seafloor areas. But beyond the technical lessons and safety improvements, Jake Morrison's disappearance served as a sobering reminder of something that modern sailors, surrounded by GPS systems and satellite communications and detailed weather forecasts, sometimes forget. The ocean remains fundamentally wild. For all our technology and preparation, we remain visitors in an environment that operates according to forces and timelines that dwarf human understanding. The investigation into Jake's disappearance officially concluded in March 2021, nearly 2 years after that perfect sailing day when he departed Bar Harbor with plans to spend summer break with his family. His boat was never found, his body never recovered, and the exact details of his final moments remain known only to the sea itself. Yet in navigating the mystery of what happened to Jake Morrison, investigators, scientists, and the Coast Guard learned something invaluable about the hidden dangers that lurk beneath seemingly familiar waters. They discovered that even the most prepared sailor, equipped with the best technology and armed with encyclopedic knowledge of seamanship, remains vulnerable to forces that operate on geological rather than human timescales. Jake's legacy lives on in every updated chart that now marks unstable seafloor areas, in every geology course that now includes sections on marine landslide risks, and in every sailor who thinks twice before assuming that calm water means safe water. His disappearance proved that the ocean's most dangerous threats aren't always the ones we can see coming. Sometimes they're the ones that have been building for millennia, waiting for the precise moment when all conditions align for catastrophe. The lesson Jake Morrison's story teaches us reaches far beyond sailing safety or marine navigation. It speaks to the fundamental human condition of operating in a world where preparation and knowledge, while essential, cannot shield us from every possible danger. It reminds us that respect for natural forces must include acceptance of their unpredictability, and that true seamanship lies not in the illusion of control, but in the wisdom to proceed with both confidence and humility. Every sailor who now checks updated charts for geological hazard warnings, every navigator who considers seafloor stability as carefully as weather conditions, and every mariner who approaches familiar waters with fresh respect is, in some small way, sailing in Jake Morrison's wake. His final voyage, though it ended in tragedy, continues to guide others towards safer passages through waters that remain as beautiful and treacherous as they were when the first human looked out at the horizon and wondered what lay beyond.